Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Jeff. I got another story that I wanted to share today. And today, in light of it being summertime, coming around to summertime, and a lot of folks are out here looking for jobs, especially new grads, that kind of thing. I wanted to share another story about when I first graduated college, and I was in the deep grind of trying to find that first job. And this story is the absolute most unbelievable job interview experience that I personally ever had. Till this day, I've never, I personally haven't even heard of a story this ridiculous. And I wanted to share this story for two reasons. One, because I think that overall, right, interviewing is such a grind. It's just such a mindless grind that's hits your ego and is very defeating a lot of times, right? The ratio of landing a job is extremely difficult for pretty much everyone across the board. And just want to share this story as a reminder of having the ability to overcome this point of your life and overcome the rejections and understand that you got to just keep on grinding through it and pushing yourself through this process and hope for the best. And especially how one interview doesn't define who you are, and you got to be able to keep on pushing through and continuing to not let one interview affect the next one that you're gonna do, especially with your confidence, right? I think there's a large aspect outside of just studying and grinding through tech screens. If you're in tech, interview questions, understanding that interviewing has such a large aspect of being able to carry your confidence from one interview to the next. And of course, right, it's been a long time since this story has happened, but it was a really incredibly, I want to say it was almost like a battle scar from that time period, while I was looking for a job as a new grad. And it's good to be able to reflect back on how far I personally have come since those days. And I hope that one day you can look back too on the tough interviews that you didn't quite get, the rejections that didn't quite pan out, and be able to laugh at them as well, like how we will on this story. All right, so first, to start things off, right? Again, to give you context, I was a new grad. Fresh out of school, I came to San Francisco, where my sister lived here, right after school with no job. I was actually first staying at my sister's friend's place. She was traveling remotely and like overseas, and she just needed someone to sublease her place. So I got like a really cheap place for a couple months for super cheap, just to kind of support her travels. And so jumped on that. And my schedule looked like this every day. Every day I would take a ride down to downtown. If you guys know, there's this area called the Metreon in downtown SF that I'd go to. I had this large food court, but most importantly, it had a lot of seating that I wouldn't be bothered, that I could use the Wi-Fi. I was using my sister's MacBook Air at the time, and all I'd do was I'd go there every single day and apply for jobs. I was living in a neighborhood called Russian Hill at the time, which was a really nice place, but a really nice neighborhood. My sister's friend was absolutely awesome for letting me sublet her place while she was traveling, gave me a foot in the door, and I was in there staying at this place for, a few $100 a month, which is unbelievable at that time, right? But it wasn't permanent, and I was taking a ride down to the basically like a food hall, mall area every single day to be able to sit at the seating there. I tried a bunch of various different places, but that's ultimately where I felt the most comfortable. And so every day, mindless applications, applying for jobs, tweaking my resume, taking interviews. They also had a movie theater upstairs where in the in-between floors, they had a lot of quiet areas where I could properly take an interview. I would also take the interviews back at the apartment as well with the door closed when I did have interview days. But day in, day out, I'd do that probably 5-6 days a week. And I got some hits. I definitely got some hits on the interviewing side. I was mainly looking for, again, at that time, I have a STEM degree. So at that time, I was looking for data analyst jobs in the Bay Area, and I wasn't having any luck landing any of them, but I was, at the time, getting the interviews. So just like most people in the middle of the grind of interviewing, I started getting, like, honestly, really, really desperate, right? Like, my lease was like, my money was drying up. I mean, I was a new grad. I didn't have like that much money to support myself. And then on top of that, I wasn't landing any jobs. And so As time went on, I slowly opened up my job search like wider and wider, right? As a new grad, everybody first dreams of landing one of those awesome, cool, big company jobs, a Google or something like that. But, as that became less of a reality for me, I just started trying to find any opportunity I could potentially get to let me in the door. And so after a while, after probably bombing like 10 interviews straight, not getting through on any of them, I started to feel my confidence really just slim out. And I opened my job search to just even doing like really small startups. And at that time, that's kind of where I noticed that the interview process for me personally started to get a little more less organized, right? Like I noticed that I was interviewing with folks that had like larger titles, for example, like a recruiter, for example, would no longer just be like a senior recruiter or like a recruiter level 2. It'd be like the director of recruiting. I'd be interviewing with a lot of these companies that were like 10 people startups, and a lot of them were really good. I met some really great people grinding away, saw some really cool startup-y Bay Area SF offices, but I also saw some really, really, really bad ones. Probably some of the worst ones I've seen or some of the worst interviews I had were through opening my job search up to like going to like the smaller companies, which was perfectly fair. I would have been grateful at any point to be able to land one of those jobs, to be able to get my foot in the door. And I would have been extremely grateful for anybody to be able to give me a shot. That's kind of where my headspace was at the time. And so this is kind of where the story takes a turn, right? Again, just low confidence, early 20s kid, I'm in interviews every single day, showing up to interviews. And then one day, same kind of thing, right? I applied to a pretty small startup. They were like a business to business startup. To be honest, I don't even remember fully what they do. And I try to look back in my email to try to find the company, I don't want to like expose any names or anything, right? That's not the point of the story, but I wanted to go back and look at what they did even. And it was like so far back, right? I couldn't even find it anymore. But B2B business, really small. I remember it was like maybe 15, 20 people or so. And just like a lot of the other startup-y type companies I was interviewing with, the first person that reached out was a recruiter. And their title was like head of recruiting or something like that. And great guy, great gentleman. And one thing that I remember about him was that he was like a lot older for a Bay Area startup employee. He was like in his 50s, great gentleman, said a lot of great things about the startup. And the job itself was a data analyst job, mainly focused on running like SQL queries, that kind of thing. So I was really excited. And so had the initial recruiter talk, nothing wrong, regular Joe Schmo recruiter interview. But this guy really stood out to me because he really sold me on the company. And it was like, it sounded great, right? It sounded like a great entry-level position. So we go ahead and we set up the mid-round. The mid-round was going to be a technical phone screen with the CTO. So like, if you know what CTO is, it's the chief technology officer. So like an executive title at this 20-person company. And keep in mind, for myself, this is the first CTO I've ever talked to. I was again, 20-something-year-old young kid. I didn't understand how these titles worked. For me, like when I thought of CTO, I just think of super high paid, important folks that I personally, especially growing up in low income, like wasn't even anywhere remotely close with. I was just like a young kid with living at my sister's friend's sublet. And honestly, I was really pretty nervous about this interview. Very specifically, maybe this was my first mistake, but I actually set this interview for Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific time. Again, young kid, didn't know what I was doing. Now I look back, right? I don't want to, working in tech, I don't want to do an interview on Friday. So definitely understand that. But that's where I set it to. And I went and waited. Waited till next week, had the interview. The interview time comes up and I'm on my phone and looking at my phone. 2 p.m. comes around. I'm looking at my phone. Nobody calls me or nobody sends me an email. I'm just by a computer waiting. Nothing happens. And luckily, very, very lucky for myself. As I mentioned earlier in the story, I told you I usually go to the Metreon or the mall into a quiet area to take an interview, right? But I felt that this one was like more important because of the titling of this gentleman. And so I stayed at the apartment that day, luckily. So I email my recruiter. My recruiter emails me back right away, like within 1 minute, was like, oh no, okay, I got you. Next thing I know, my phone rings. We're like about probably 15, 20 minutes late already from on the interview. And keep in mind, the interview was it was either like a 30-minute or 45-minute screen. So about half the time was already up. And, this was already kind of a little bit of a red flag. This is the part where the story gets incredibly weird, right? This guy calls me and he's clearly in a car, like I can hear he's in a car. And not only that, it almost sounds like a party of some sorts, right? I hear ladies behind him. I hear a lot of chattering, but I know he's in the car because I can hear the wind noise. And on top of that, of course, I can't verify, right? I hear clinks of like glasses of some sorts. So it sounded like it was like kind of a party-ish type of scene. Randomly you'd hear somebody in the background yell out something, and they're clearly having a good time in this vehicle somewhere in a back of, like, in my opinion, I imagined it as like maybe like a party bus or something like that, because it had been a large amount of people, at least like 5 people or so. It sounded like were in the background. I could barely hear this guy, right? He calls me. He doesn't ask me anything about myself. I'm in a quiet room, sitting in a room by myself, right? And on the other line, it's like this crazy chattering, like someone on the phone, and the guy doesn't ask me any questions about myself. And he's just like, hey, let's jump straight into the questions. And we're jumping into the questions. He just asked me like SQL questions right away. And I could barely hear him because the phone was like sort of breaking up. It was kind of not. And to be honest, right, I was completely like, I could barely hear the question that he was saying. And at that time, I already felt I already didn't know if I was supposed to like ask him back questions. And like, I just felt like the unresponsiveness from this gentleman. He's in the car and like, I'm trying to answer the question as best as possible. And then there's like long pauses, right? I can't tell if the long pauses were from the phone like slightly disconnecting or because he had me on mute. I could tell he was putting me on mute because all the sound would stop for a while and then all the chattering would come back on. So I'm answering these questions. I'm bombing this interview. I mean, I don't even know what the heck is going on at this point. At one point, the phone completely disconnects because he goes, I can tell it sounds like he like goes under a tunnel because the ambiance noise kind of changes, and then all of a sudden it disconnects. And I could hear him like, as he's talking, I could hear the disconnect, kind of like if you were approaching a tunnel and then all of a sudden it cuts off. And I don't know where he just calls me back and he's like, sorry for the disconnect, calls me back, continues the conversation, puts me on mute while I'm trying to answer these questions. And in the moment it unmutes, it's just like folks are laughing, that kind of stuff. And to be honest, that would have been all fine and dandy, right? Sure, busy guy, Friday, maybe the graciousness of his heart, he's gonna take this interview anyways, and maybe they dropped it on the calendar. I think rescheduling would have been better at this point, but this is kind of where it gets even crazier, and this is kind of where it hit my confidence even harder. And seriously, I think that this interview really like hit me deep for a couple weeks, and I felt like almost had to recover from this. What got really bad is that I realized that I started noticing that the folks in the background were talking about me, right? They were talking about the interview, and they were kind of like chattering about what's going on, and like, and I could just hear a little bit of laughing, right? And I think that's, in my opinion, I think that's what happened. And of course, right, this is all speculation, but what I think happened was that after a while, the guy already knew I wasn't going to pass the interview. And he was to continue to ask me these questions. And I wish he would have just let me off the phone at that point, but he didn't. He continued to ask me various questions. And, he would unmute and I'd hear like a little bit of laughing and giggling. And then he would just go ahead and ask me about another question. He would just say like, oh, nope, that's wrong. Try this one, and ask me another question. And then in the very end, the guy didn't even ask me like, hey, thanks for your time, that kind of thing. He just straight up said, yeah, thanks for jumping on and interviewing, we'll reach out soon. You know, he didn't usually, like how interviews end is they usually ask if there's any questions you want to ask about the company or that kind of thing. But he just cut it off right then and there. And man, this was like seriously one of the oddest situations I've ever had. And man, especially if I can even describe to you the mindset and time frame of this, right? Being a new grad, fresh out of school, like let's just say this was the 11th interview I've not gotten through, hundreds of job applications already sent in with hundreds of rejection. Just trying to get my foot in the door, and just hoping that someone would take a shot at me and give me an opportunity where I would just go in, learn, work hard, you know, do what I can. And going through that interview was just like, was absolutely heartbreaking. But in the end, right, what I want to close this off with, and one of the reasons why I want to tell this story again, looking back, I have a lot of great reflection looking back at the instance, right? Looking back at the instance, number one, that interview, that job was an absolute red flag. And unfortunately, there are bad jobs out there, and this happened to be one of them. If I even landed this job, if they even taken me in, can you imagine what type of environment or what kind of workplace it would have been for me, or if I would have grown to become the software engineer that I am today? And I think that it absolutely wouldn't have, because I have good comparables, and good comparables are the opportunities that I did end up landing. And second, right, like one of the large mistakes that I made during that time was letting this interview really carry me over to the next interviews and the next one and the next one. And I just want this story to be a reminder to you that interviewing is extremely hard, right? It's not easy, but it's not always as black and white as we want it to be, or as equal or unequal as it is. So many biases, so many things have to land correctly. Not all jobs are good, and not all jobs are bad. I really am a big believer that sometimes we want something so bad and get those so desperate to get a job and land that offer, we forget to even remind ourselves of the standards that we have for ourselves. And man, like million times over, I'm so happy that that job wasn't the first job that ended up landing, even though I wasn't able to land a job for some time afterwards, after that job. But just another reminder, right, that this period of interviewing and this grind is all temporary. Eventually, you will find something. You will find something good for yourself, and you will find an opportunity. But just don't let this hit your confidence, and understand that, and definitely do not let these things carry over, right? All right, just wanted to close this video out again by saying, don't let one job opportunity, don't let one interview define who you are moving forward. And understand that one day you're going to look back at the interviews that you bombed and the ones that really hurt you the most, and just it's going to be a reminder of how far you've come. And I think I was stronger for it in the end, and I just wanted this to be a reminder of that. All right, so that's it. I hope that story was at least entertaining. If you have any questions for me, love to be able to discuss. If not, I'll talk to you on the next one. Latest.